From feared to favoured, Europe is sliding to the right. Extremist politics was actively avoided post-World War II. Now it's a modern force to be reckoned with. So what's behind the swing, and why is it particularly resonating with young men? It's up for debate here on Counterpoints with me, Melinda Nucifora. The French have a term, cordon sanitaire or firewall. It's used to describe the long-standing European efforts to prevent extremist parties from forming government. But try as they might, that firewall has failed in many countries, and the far right is heating up election races across the continent.
I'm happy about this revolution because I hope at least something will happen. I hope that something good will come out of this because things are going really badly.
The rise of far-right parties and the extremes in general always happens when democracy isn't working well, when the middle class is suffering.
There are problems such as high prices and illegal migration, which haven't been addressed by the political system that's been governing during the last decades. That's why people turn to the right.
It is true that we live in a society of insecurity, of violence, and where we don't get recognition for our work. So actually, it doesn't surprise me.
7 European countries now have far-right governments, and hardline parties performed strongly in 3 more. For many, progressive ideologies and centrist politics have been sacrificed for promises of cheaper groceries and tougher border controls. And it's particularly true for young voters. Concerns about climate change and social justice are being overshadowed by fears of prolonged unemployment and the cost of living crisis. On this episode of Counterpoints, we'll ask our expert panel what's behind the rise of the right across Europe, if the swing poses a danger to the continent, and why the movement is particularly resonating with young voters. Stay with us. Welcome to Counterpoints on Al Arabiya English. Well, to discuss the shifting political landscape across Europe, I'm joined by Dominik Tarzynski, the Polish MEP from the country's Law and Justice Party. Kajsa Ekis Ekman, the Swedish author and journalist, who is also the editor-in-chief of Parabol Press, is joining us. And rounding out our panel, Nathalie Tocci, a political scientist who is currently the director of the Institute of International Affairs in Italy. Thank you all for being here on Counterpoints. We're witnessing quite a remarkable political shift across Europe over the past few years, where far-right parties have been surging across the continent, perhaps in a mainstream way we haven't seen before. There is a real sense that the status quo just isn't serving people, and communities are really looking to snub mainstream political parties, and they're searching for alternatives. So, Dominik, let me ask you first, why do you think the right is doing so well in various countries across Europe?
Well, let me start with the data, because we can debate, we can have different opinions, we can be very different with our view on political events, especially recently, but data never lie. I'm here in Brussels, in the European Parliament, and the most important source of the data is Eurostat. So when someone is asking me why conservatives, why right-wing parties are winning, taking over, we can see change in many countries like I don't know, Hungary, Italy, Spain, Vox, and others. Data is the reason. So let me start with criminality. So you have official data, you got Poland here, you got Italy here, and you've got Sweden here. This is the reason, number 1, criminality. Number 2, I've got three, don't worry. Unemployment, official data. Conservative Poland, then Italy, before Meloni, and Sweden, socialist for hundreds of years. Reason number three, rapes and sexual violence. Conservative Poland in here, and then you've got Sweden. So when someone is asking me why, I answer because of the data, because of what is happening under the socialists, leftism, and liberals for years. Data would never lie. When someone is asking me why there is no such a case in Poland, is because there is no illegal migration. I keep repeating it from 2018. So when someone is asking me why Poland is different, because we are having conservative government for years, for many years, so that is the answer. And it's very simple. It's not my opinion. It's official data.
Okay, well, let's ask Kajsa, what do you think of that data and those graphs? Do you think that is a valid argument, or could we be looking at different kinds of data and get different sorts of answers?
Well, first of all, I'm very honored to be on the show, so thank you so much for the invitation. I definitely think there is a discontent, not only in Western Europe, also in Eastern Europe, with the current state of affairs. And I think immigration might have something to do with it, but I think it's minor. The main cause is the dismantling, not to say the slaughtering of the welfare state that we have witnessed during the past 20, 30 years. Sweden used to be a country, for example, where we had zero unemployment. I mean, the unemployment we had was people just switching jobs. You know, we used to have a welfare state that took care of everybody. Now, the neoliberal project has obviously failed. It was evident after 2008. Neoliberalism came to an end. Now, the ruling classes were very careful not to take the blame for this. So they shifted ideology from a neoliberal ideology where, you know, everybody should fend for themselves and basically there should be no state, into a kind of extreme right-wing ideology, blaming the immigrants, basically. And I think this is a kind of magic thing that happened. You know, instead of blaming the United States for making wars all over the Middle East and Asia, thereby creating an influx of migrants that the US didn't take in, that came to Europe, we instead started blaming the migrants and not the American empire. Now, let me just say something about the data that the Polish comrade presented. Data doesn't lie, but it can be interpreted. I think you know very well that there are countries where there are 0 rape cases reported. Does that mean that there is no rape in these countries? Or does that mean that women don't dare to report? If you would know... You
don't have 0. You have one of the highest levels in Europe.
During many, many years that encouraged women to report rape, you know, from the police and from society. So reported rape cases do not reflect actual rapes. They represent, and every researcher knows this, propensity of denouncing rapes. Now, second of all, you have to know that in Sweden, if one man rapes one woman 100 times, that counts as 100 rapes. In some countries, that counts as 1 rape. So you have to know how to understand and analyze statistics as well. You can't just hold up a paper, comrade.
Nathalie, what do you think?
Sorry, I mean, it's not a comedy show. Don't you give me this argument about the way you read data. Don't you give me this argument, because the fact is that in Warsaw, you can walk at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday night and no one will ever bother you. When I visited Sweden,
let me tell you, I live in Sweden.
When I visited Sweden, I had to run. I'm a big man. I'm a very big man, and I had to run. So I know Sweden. I have many friends in Sweden. I know how the situation is under socialists. I know that you cannot go out after midnight. That is the fact. And obviously you can create reality. And you can.
We have a right-wing government. We don't have a socialist government.
Listen, yeah.
You know what government we have?
What are you talking about? You don't know what the right wing is.
Do you know what government we have in Sweden?
Listen, Swedish Democrats are the right wing in your position, in your view. Do you think that Swedish Democrats are in the government?
Do you know what government we have?
Yeah, of course I know, because I was on election night in Sweden. I was
So
there.
what government
I was
do we have? You said it was socialist.
I was witnessing the third place of Swedish Democrats, one of the best in years. Socialists
So
were
what
for
government do we have,
135
sir? Because
years,
you said
for
it's socialist.
135 years in Sweden. So your government,
What is our
from
government?
my point of view,
All right, I'm going to turn this over
What is
to
our
Nathalie
government, sir?
now,
What is a fact?
just to get a broader perspective.
What is our government?
Nathalie, what
Let me
do
just
you
ask, what is our
make
government?
of this discussion about statistics?
He doesn't know. He
Does
said it
data
was
lie?
socialist, but our government is right-wing.
We'll
So you
come
have
back to
to
that
get
point
that
in
right,
just a
sir.
moment, but I want to bring Nathalie into our debate here. Give me your perspective on what you've heard so far.
Yeah, well, perhaps just to clarify that little dispute there, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, Sweden has a right-wing government, full stop. But back to the question. So firstly, I would say the following. I mean, this entire story of the rise of the right, or the nationalist right, the populist right, first in Europe, firstly, I think that we need to recognize that this is not a constant story, right? I mean, this has come in waves, and it's actually quite a heterogeneous story. It comes in waves in the sense that the first wave essentially began after or on the cusp, basically, of the global financial crisis, which then led to the Eurozone crisis. So there's a story of economic crisis, which leads to the rise of the far right. It actually, sorry, could you please let me finish speaking? It actually went down. So if you actually take the years beginning 2018, 2019, 2020, throughout the pandemic, the far right in Europe actually went down rather than up. And then it's only after the second year, so once we're into the second year of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that it actually starts going up. And that's really when the economic consequences of the war in Europe, particularly as a result of the energy crisis, really kick in. And there's very obviously a nexus between the economy and migration. So migration itself, actually, migration flows in Europe go up and down, and there isn't actually a correlation between the level of the flow and the support for the far right. What there is a connection with is the economic situation, the way in which that interlocks with the perception of migration, and that nexus basically is what leads to a support for the far right. So this is actually quite a heterogeneous story. Let's take one example for Spain. Spain is actually a country which has very high levels of migration, but the economy is doing rather well. This explains why actually the far right in Spain is not doing particularly well. So I think we really need to look at this data, as I said, both as it evolves over time, but also as it plays out in different countries. The final thing that I wanted to say is that this is not just a European story. It's not just a European story, it's not just a story in the United States, but it's also a story in countries that are at very different stages of their development. Think about the situation in India, for example, right? In India, there has been the growth of the nationalist right in power, obviously, through Narendra Modi. This is not a country in decline. It's obviously a country on the rise. So I think that in order to get our heads around what is actually happening, yes, we need to look at the hard facts, the data, as you were referring to it earlier. But I think we also need to look at the way in which this data interlocks also with a number of other factors, including the information space, the disinformation space, the way in which basically there's a manipulation of a lot of this data, as I think was also fairly obvious in the conversation that we've just had.
Dominik, go ahead.
Okay, coming back to Swedish government. From your perspective, it might be far-right government. From my perspective, there are liberals. Liberals here in Brussels, in European Parliament, are always in coalition with socialists and communists. So that's Sweden. If you're talking about Spain, after Zapatero, what's happened in Spain is the rise of Vox, which is building its power for last 3 or 5 years. You can be blind on Vox. You can tell that they are not doing good. They are doing great. If we are talking about Italy,
but they lost elections repeatedly.
Before, it's a process. I'm a politician. It's a process. If you lost election, I lost my election 3 times in a row, and then I became 4th time elected member of the European Parliament with the best score in Poland. So you don't understand politics. It's a process. They are rising, they are growing, and they will take power in Spain. It's a matter of time. If you are talking about the crisis as a global crisis, I do understand you meant migration. Look at Saudi Arabia, a perfect example. They are doing great.
I wasn't talking about.
Okay, let's move. Let's stay within Europe. Dominik, no, I'm just going to move this conversation on.
This is very important because this is global conflict, and Saudi Arabia is doing great because there is no illegal migration. Poland is doing great because there is no illegal migration, and they can be interpreted, but there is 0 illegal migration and 0 terrorist attack. Poland is the only country in Europe with 0 terrorist attack. You cannot interpret that, this kind of situation.
I'm going to put that to Kajsa as well with regards to migration. Kajsa, what do you think? Is this all about migration? It's one of the key concerns that voters have raised when they talk about casting their vote for the right. Do you think that migration is amplifying people's concerns and that's why the right is resonating?
Well, I think it's very interesting. First of all, that the comrade doesn't really know what government we have in Sweden, because in Sweden we have a right-wing government, the Conservative Party
it's a right-wing, not for me.
And the supporting party is the extreme right-wing party, Sweden Democrats, so we don't have.
They're not the part of the government.
Now, the second thing I think is important to note here is that we noticed that the right-wing comrade here from Poland has not said anything about the economy. And I think that's very significant because, if you roll back 20 years, the right-wing project was basically only about economy. That was their main argument. They were saying, we need to privatize, we need to deregulate, we need to sell out the public sector. Now, that was a big failure, and we all know it. We all know that was a big failure because we didn't have a single privatization that worked. Now, to avoid talking about this, to avoid economic discussion about the huge gaps that we have now, and in Sweden, the gaps between rich and poor are growing the fastest in the whole of the Western world. So instead of talking about that, they have decided to forget that the economy exists and start talking about other things. Now, when you have migration at the same time as you have deregulation and privatization, obviously that's going to create a lot of turmoil because the way that the immigrants are being integrated into society won't work as smoothly as it would have done with the present state. Now, I think in Sweden, the welfare state hasn't been dismantled altogether. And we don't have, as the comrade mentioned, illegal immigrants. I think he's confusing us with the United States or something like that. In Sweden, we know exactly who's coming in and who's leaving.
Before we get too broad and move on to our next segment, I do want to ask you, Nathalie, before we move on to our second section of our debate, do you believe that this is a short-term trend, or is this just the start of a stronger swing to the right that we can expect to see across Europe throughout this year and into next year?
Well, I think that depends. It depends on how well the left-wing.
Kajsa, I'm sorry. I'm just going to ask Nathalie if she can weigh in on this one.
Oh, sorry.
No, not at all. Thank you.
So, as I said, I think this comes in waves, right? So there's nothing inevitable and inexorable about the rise of the right. I think it largely depends on conditions. How is the European economy going to go? I think, as I said, I think that is actually the main determinant. If you empirically, as I said, look at how there's been a rise and fall over time. I think the other factor, which is actually having a big impact on the rise of the right, or perhaps the fall of the right in Europe, is what's happening in the United States. And let me perhaps just say a couple of words on this. I assumed, and I was wrong in assuming, that the election of Donald Trump would have actually strengthened the far right in Europe. I think that it's actually having the opposite effect, not unlike Brexit had back, almost a decade ago. Because it is when far-right movements, parties, governments essentially not only rise to power, but do so in a rather catastrophic way, as was the case in the case of the Brexit referendum. Look at the results, as now is the case with the meltdown, basically, of the US economy under Trump. I think that this has an effect on Europeans of basically saying, hang on a sec, maybe we just want to go back to the sort of boring old traditional parties rather than this very insecure, in a sense, environment that at times the far right can represent. So I think actually what happens externally, particularly in the United States, can paradoxically have a weakening effect rather than a strengthening effect on the far right in Europe.
Dominik, weigh in on what Nathalie has said, and then we'll move on.
If I may, ladies, please listen to me for 60 seconds, okay? Do not disturb. You said that I did not mention economy. So once again, I would like to ask all our viewers to use Google. First of all, the lowest unemployment in European Union is in Poland under far-right government. The lowest number of rapes in Europe under conservative government is Poland. The highest GDP after COVID in European Union is Poland under conservative government. Most of the top jobs are women in Poland under conservative government. So you can call everyone far right. You can call the Swedish Prime Minister far right. You can call everyone far. You are far left to me. It doesn't matter. It's just a word. It's just words. But when you Google data, Poland, conservative for years, we haven't had not even one terrorist attack. We are the lowest with unemployment. Economy is booming. So don't you give me this argument about the economy. Use Google.
Kajsa, you wanted to say something before we moved on?
So that's why you lost elections, if the situation is so great.
Excuse me, our government is a conservative government. You would say far-right government. Tusk is EPP. He's not a socialist. All those socialists who are here in European Parliament are now arrested for Qatargate, the biggest corruption scandal when Qatar paid money to buy them. This is socialism. This is what they do in the European Parliament. This is the real face of far left. Eva Kaili, vice president of the European Parliament, arrested with his suitcases of money. Another, Cozzolino, Italian member of the Communist Party, arrested for Qatargate because Qatar paid a lot of money and he bought them. And other socialists, another from Socialist Party. So this is the real face of modern, open, diverse socialism. And we, the bad ones, are leading. 0 rapes in Poland. 0. The numbers are so low that you cannot even compare it with the rest of the world. And as I said, it is true. This conflict, this problem, this crisis is a global crisis. And I pay my respect to Saudi Arabia for protecting their people.
Okay, so you were talking about rapes, about attacks. So let me move on to segment 2 when we talk about potential risks that may be associated, that some people associate with the right. Some people are concerned about this anti-immigration rhetoric that could lead to violence. For example, attacks on asylum seekers in Berlin have more than doubled in the past year, and others have warned that once the right takes power, they might utilise that through the courts or other institutions for their own political benefit, something that Poland has been accused of. So I guess, seeing as I'm pointing the finger at Poland there, Dominik, is there a potential risk to democracy that the far right poses?
Okay, far left are trying to call me a fascist, Islamophobe. So my grandfather fought against fascism, which fascism came from Italy, against Nazis from Germany. Then after war, he fought against communists, Bolsheviks. Now they call me a fascist and Islamophobe, even though one of my closest friends is from Syria. He came to Poland 30 years ago. He got married. He raised his children in Christian faith, but he's Syrian. He's a Muslim. He's one of my closest friends. So it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter what we say. We are always labeled fascists, Islamophobes, and anti-democratic. What we do, we love our families. We love our values. We love our culture. We love our food. We are a homogenic society. And not even one far left leftist will not tell us what to do, how to change the engineering of the society in Poland, just like Saudi Arabia would not let anyone to change their culture because some democratic far left will say that they are, I don't know, anti-women or anti-democratic or whatever.
Kajsa, what do you think? Is there a risk associated with the rise of right across Europe?
Why don't we speak about the risk of far left?
Well, because our topic for this discussion is the far right, and I'm going to put that question to Kajsa and let her answer.
I'm happy to join you when we're going to discuss far left as well.
Sure. We'll invite you for that one, absolutely. But Kajsa, please.
Thank you. Well, I think people, basically the population of Europe is being manipulated ever since September 11th to think that the enemy of the U.S. is their enemy. You know, we used to think that communism was our main enemy. The U.S. shifted enemy. All of a sudden it was Islam because the U.S. wanted to fight wars in the Middle East and Asia. And all of a sudden we had to believe that too. Now we are made to believe that our enemy is Putin because the U.S. wanted to fight him. And now we are in a state of confusion because the U.S. doesn't want that anymore. You know, and I think it's really interesting how this anti-Muslim sentiment has been like artificially put on the European populations. And it's been done so in a very intelligent way because our far-right parties used to be anti-immigrant in general. But after September 11th, more and more started focusing on Muslims. By that way, they try to gain the votes of other immigrants. And I think this is a way that imperialism has of trying to kill two birds in one stone. On one hand, they're trying to justify the wars in the Middle East by creating Islamophobia in Europe, thereby for us not, for example, showing support for victims in Palestine, for example, in the ongoing genocide. What they're also managing to do is create a kind of hierarchical labor market, whereas they're really kind of structuring the labor market, where some workers are getting lower paid, almost permanently. They've also created this threshold of salaries where you can be kicked out of the country if you don't earn enough, and so on and so forth. So this has been really detrimental to society and to the cohesion of society. You know, it's very sad to see Sweden, a society that used to be, you know, very solidaric, very generous, where we used to take care of one another, you know, turn on one another.
So how many refugees do you have at your home? How many?
Excuse me, if I may finish. Sorry, you've had enough time, sir.
How many? How many is at your apartment? How many did you take?
Excuse me. Can I continue, please?
Please.
If you tell us how many refugees you have at your apartment.
Excuse me, can I continue, please?
Dominik, just let Kajsa finish, and then I want to turn it over to Nathalie. So everyone, we're going to keep this nice and balanced. Kajsa, finish up, and then I'll turn it over to Nathalie.
Yeah, so we've had school shootings. We've had, terrible problems that I think this rhetoric that the far right is whipping up might have something to do with it. I also do think the left is a bit to blame, and I want to comment on something Nathalie said. She said that maybe what's going to happen with the success of the far right is that, oh, we're all going to turn to the old traditional parties. And I see that as a danger too, because neither of those forces are able to even out the major class differences and the major gaps that have arisen after neoliberalism. Neither is actually able to tackle neoliberalism because both the far right and the traditional parties, both conservative and social democrat, are tied to neoliberalism and are tied to keeping those major class differences and this, you know, absurd wealth where like 1 or 2% of the country have billions. So I think that is a problem, that there is this pendulum that's going back and forth, you know, where the left is not really finding the way to capitalize on this discontent. And where we're seeing, you know, the gaps are just growing. With the gaps growing, we're seeing misery, we're seeing criminality, we're seeing big problems. Right. And I think the only force that can deal with that must be a force that must take control take control over the state and really undo the neoliberal reforms that we've had for so many decades.
Nathalie, I just want to go to you first, then Dominik, I'm going to come back to you. I just want to return to the original focus of our segment about whether or not you see this swing posing any danger to democracy, to the European Union as a cohesive bloc, or as you've said in previous answers, is this just a wave and the pendulum will swing back again?
Well, I mean, I absolutely do think the rise of the far right is a threat to democracy. But let me go back to a point that was being discussed earlier, which is how migration fits into all of this. And to me, migration is not an issue per se, right? What it is, or rather, what ignites support for the far right is fear. And so to me, the interesting question is, how does migration interlock with fear? Because obviously, the more fear there is, and the more inevitably people are going to turn to extremes, and in particular to the extreme right. So I think one dimension of fear ignited by migration is, especially irregular migration, is the idea that there is no control, right? You don't know who's coming in, you don't know who's coming out, and that is obviously something that can very easily ignite fear. I think the second dimension is what I was talking about earlier, i.e. this connection between the economy and migration, the migrants stealing our jobs, right? Now, if obviously there are jobs to be found, it's harder to ignite that kind of fear. If there are no jobs to be found, it's much easier to ignite that fear. And then the third and final dimension is the way in which all this is used and abused through propaganda. I mean, it is now known, for instance, in Germany, that there is a very big role being played by Russian propaganda to magnify this migration fear, right? Precisely because it will inevitably lead to an increased support for the AfD in Germany. So I think we also need to bear in mind the way in which external players are actually playing into these internal European fears. And I think it's that fear, and indeed the kind of parties that it then leads that fear to support, which then in themselves become a threat to liberal democracy, and in particular to the rule of law.
Interesting points. Dominik, you wanted to say something. Please go ahead.
Yes, this rubbish about the fear and all this kind of philosophy and psychology, beautiful words, it's a crap. No one is afraid. I don't have a phobia. I'm not an Islamophobe. I went to Lampedusa. I spent there 2 days in the camp with these illegal migrants. I know the situation, and I do not want this in Poland. So don't give us the smart, beautiful words about the fear, about the psychology. I don't have a fear. I don't have a phobia. I love Poland. This is what I like. This is how I want to live. And no one ever will force us with the smart, beautiful words about the need of educated migration. There is no need for that. Again, the lowest unemployment is Poland. The highest GDP after COVID is Poland. We are safe. Zero terrorist attack. The lowest level of rapes. And this is how Poland beautiful and safe is. I went to Lampedusa and I was scared. I talked to the people. I talked to the girls who were crying. We're crying because what leftists did. And the only fear, just let me finish, the only fear we have here in European Parliament is far left, corrupted, arrested from Socialist Party. As I said, Vice President Kaili from Greece was arrested with money, with the full pockets of money from Qatar. This is democracy. This is modern world. We don't want that, and I'm going to fight this crap till the end of the day.
Okay, Nathalie, is it just words, this fear?
Well, I don't think so, because I actually do think that, poll after poll, this comes out. Yeah, I mean, people feel scared, they are insecure, and the more they feel scared and insecure, and the more they support the far right. This is not just my opinion. We started this conversation right at the beginning.
Just let Nathalie finish. Thanks, Dominik.
Don't worry, Yeah, exactly. I think you can go and insult some of your other colleagues. I don't know you. I've never met you. So please go and insult someone else, okay?
I'm not insulting.
I don't think that either.
You're talking about the fear all the time. I'm not insulting. You're talking about the fear all the
Dominik,
time.
just let Nathalie finish her comment,
reality.
please.
Ooh. Okay, listen, I don't think I actually can continue this conversation in this way. I think this man really needs to calm down a little bit. I mean, I think everyone is being extremely calm and polite, and there's this shouting voice on issues that are often completely unrelated to this conversation. So anyway, I was talking about data, right? We started this conversation calmly about data, and there is data supporting the fact that the more there is fear and anxiety and the more there is support for the far right. I'm not talking about whether the MEP here is scared or not. I'm not particularly interested in whether he is scared or not. I'm talking about the kind of things that the public says it feels, right? And that to me is the only thing that there is to talk about.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but I want to get to our last segment. So let's move on. Progressive parties have long courted younger voters advocating for issues such as climate change, social justice, free speech. But recent polls seem to suggest that those days are over. In Germany, the Greens slipped 23% of the youth vote. Sorry, the Greens captured 23% of the youth vote in 2019, but just 11% this time around. And in France, the National Rally captured 39% of voters aged 18 to 24. So, Kajsa, let me put this to you. Why do you think that the right is resonating strongly with young people in particular?
Well, I think the left here made a strategic mistake in saying that men are women and all these other things that obviously are not scientific. And I think because of that, the left didn't stick to like real equality issues, economic issues, where we actually had all the answers, you know? I mean, the neoliberal project was a failure. We could just have said that. But instead, we started talking about other things like values and things. And I think, you know, young people are seeing through that. I also think that when it comes to the men-women divide here, you know, that men tend to be more right-wing and women tend to be more left-wing, that also has an economic explanation, because women have borne the brunt of the cuts in the welfare state. We're the ones that work in the public sector. We work in hospitals, we work in education, we work in elderly care. Of course, if they slash the budget, you know, put the welfare sector through austerity, we're going to have to do the same jobs, but for free at home. So, of course, we don't want that. Whereas men, you know, are not to the same extent affected by austerity, especially when it comes to the welfare state.
Mm-hmm. Dominik, as the male on our panel, let me ask you, polls show that young men are more attracted to right-leaning parties than women. Why do you think that is?
Because we are responsible, because we are caring, because we love and respect women. We want to take care of them. Our conservative way of thinking about the world is that we are fighters, we provide, we protect, we love, we cherish, and women is the person who should be taken care of. That's very simple. And I must agree that the main problem of the left was to say that women is a man or man is a woman. It's ridiculous. Our way of thinking about existence, about the world, about our responsibility is that man is the one who provides and protects. This is why conservative way is rising. And when you're talking about the young people, you have to remember that they do not know communism as I do. I used to live under communism. They do not know war. This is the generation, the first generation, 70 years of no war in Europe. So different expectations, different goals, different imagination of life or struggle. We had to, I mean, my parents remember the stories from the war. Now they can think about something else, thank God. So there is many reasons, but the main reason is that women, somewhere deep in them, they expect to be taken care of, to be loved.
Well, I would say that perhaps that's a bit of an outdated idea. As an independent woman myself, I don't necessarily feel like I need a man to take care of me. So
yeah.
why
Every
can't...
woman
And
in
weren't you
Poland is
just saying that women hold powerful roles in Poland? So why do we need the men to look after us?
What I'm saying is that my woman, our women, are independent but loved. They are not men. They are not coal miners. They are not going to war. They are not mainly in jail as men. They are women. And all this independent woman, it's a crap, because women needs to be taken care of, not in the way that she cannot or do not know how to do. She is independent. She's successful. Many of them making more money than men. It's not about money. It's not about independence. It's about emotional care. It's about the role the man has throughout the ages.
Okay, Nathalie, what do you think? Is this the argument why you think young men are turning to the right, because they need to protect poor innocent women like me?
They want to. That's their choice.
Nathalie, what do you think?
I think, you know, what Dominik said, I think, speaks for itself. So no need to comment on that. What I will say, though, is absolutely, I'm sure you are. What I will say is actually something that we haven't touched on, which I think is extremely important, which has to do with the connection between social media and what we're talking about. I think it is fairly clear that the far right has been far savvier in using social media than others. And I think this plays a big role in explaining why youth that once upon a time, indeed, if you think about, you know, Fridays for Future, I mean, you were referring to the support, youth support, for instance, of the Greens. It is something that, Dominik, could you please stop laughing? Right?
Sorry.
Okay.
You
A
forgot
little bit
about
of politeness, I think,
you
may
forgot
help.
about the era of Zuckerberg and emoji with a man who is pregnant. You forgot about this.
Okay,
Just a moment. Just
him.
let Nathalie finish, and then I'll come to you for your answer.
I would suggest that you mute him. Okay, so simply to say that I think there is an element of, you know, the far right actually knowing how to use social media far more effectively. And I think that, as I said, this plays a big role in explaining this tilt of youth, which, as I said, nothing is set in stone. It is like this now. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually swings in the opposite direction in only a few years' time, because especially when we're talking about youth, there is, you know, an element which is actually quite fickle in the political orientations of youth, historically speaking.
Dominik, are you laughing because you don't think that the far right have harnessed social media to their benefit?
Every time when I hear this kind of explanation, like manipulation, social media, influence, the disinformation, that's the reason. No, the reason is a logic. And you have to admit it. You forgot about the years of Zuckerberg promoting leftist ideology. You forgot about the Twitter. You forgot about YouTube and Google. When you have this emoji, don't stop me now. Don't stop me now.
Kajsa, let's let Dominik finish, and then I'm going to come to you because we're almost out of time. So Dominik, you finish up, then I'm going to go to Kajsa, and then we're going to have to wrap up. Go ahead.
Let me finish.
Please.
Censorship on social media for decades. Emojis, a man pregnant, all these pride flags, all these gays, LGBTs, and all this for years. For years. They even banned Donald Trump. That was censorship. They banned the conservative agenda for years. And now you're trying to say that for a year or two last years, social media changed the world? Don't be ridiculous with this kind of analysis.
Okay, Kajsa, do you think social media has played a role in the success of the right?
Yeah, well, social media is just a tool, though. You know, I think deep down, it's all about psychology and how we relate to each other. You know, social media is not a thing in and of itself. You know, I would say, I think it's funny how, like, the far right will say that anything that's not them is leftist. I mean, you know, there are more than two ideologies in the world, and there's more than two factors. You know, we leftists, we socialists, we sure don't think that Facebook and Meta is leftist. We think it's It's a capitalist company that used to adopt liberalism because it was, fashionable, and now they are changing because they have to adapt to their times, and they always will, But it's not a progressive force, if you talk about the opinion of what a socialist would say, I think it's not really about social media. I think it's as simple as when the topics being discussed are economy, class questions, and equality, the left wins. When the topics discussed are other issues, peripheral issues, such as values, morals, cultures, the right wing wins. And I think it's a strategic mistake of the left to let that be the topic of discussion and to adopt fringe views that actually don't have support in the majority of the population. Because I think we all lose out on that. And I think the left has to get back to the core values, which is distribution of wealth.
Just finally then, Nathalie, round out our discussion. Do you think the left did they lose their way? Is it that the right won or the left lost it?
Well, that's a good question. I think it is fair to say that in all fairness, and this is not a news story, but, since the end of the Cold War, the left or the center-left has really struggled to find a new compelling narrative. And it looked like for a while that the green narrative could be blended. And in some countries, it kind of worked for a while, right? I think this is partly the story of Spain, partly the story of the Netherlands, for example. But I think on a whole, it hasn't really provided as simple, quote unquote, and compelling a narrative as often the far right tends to do, which, as I said, doesn't necessarily have to do with facts and figures, but it does have to do with providing, as I said, a story that resonates. And then, of course, and I agree that, of course, social media is a tool, but it's a tool that some people know how to use more than others, to be honest. And I think that has also been part of the failing.
That is, unfortunately, all we have time for. It's been such an interesting debate, and I appreciate your back and forth. Dominik Tarzynski, Polish MP. Pleasure. Kajsa Ekis Ekman, the Swedish author and journalist, and Nathalie Tocci, the Italian political scientist. Thank you, three of you, for your time here on Counterpoints. And thanks to you at home for tuning in to Counterpoints with me, Melinda Nucifora. You can catch all our debates by subscribing to Al Arabiya English's YouTube channel and following us on X and TikTok so you don't miss any more debates like that one. We'll see you next time.